The first time my family went completely quiet was the day the bank manager placed a ring of brass keys in my shaking hand and said my father had trusted me with Maple Street. I was still wearing the black dress from Dad's funeral. My mother had spent the whole morning acting like I was only there to sign papers and step aside. My older brother Ryan had already told everyone I would probably ask for money, because that was what family failures do when real work gets hard. My sister Melissa wouldn't even look at me. A week earlier, they had sat at Mom's kitchen table and told me Dad left me nothing because he was tired of bailing me out. That lie had burned more than the grief. But when Mr. Harlan slid those keys across his desk, his face was careful, almost sad, and he said there were sealed instructions, a property file, and one question my father had asked him to answer only after I opened the upstairs office. That was the moment I understood two things. My family had betrayed me, and Dad had left behind a truth none of them saw coming. Stay with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who believes the truth always finds its way. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 33 years old then, living in Dayton, Ohio. I worked as a receptionist at a physical therapy clinic on the east side of town. I was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, showed up early, and said yes when other people needed help. I was quiet, patient, and maybe a little too willing to believe that if I kept being kind, people would eventually be fair back. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple. I rented a small upstairs apartment over a laundromat. The pipes knocked in winter, and the windows stuck in summer, but it was mine. I worked weekdays at the clinic, answered phones, checked patients in, and helped older people fill out forms they could not read without glasses. On Fridays, I brought muffins for the staff. On Sundays, I visited my parents' house for dinner, unless Ryan was in one of his moods. My father, Tom Bennett, had owned a hardware store on Maple Street for almost 30 years. Bennett's Supply was not fancy, but people trusted him. If Mrs. Keller from 3 blocks over needed one odd screw from a broken porch rail, Dad could find it in 10 seconds. If a young couple bought their first house and had no clue what they were doing, Dad walked them aisle by aisle like a teacher. When I was little, I loved that store. It smelled like wood dust, rubber hoses, and coffee. Dad let me sort paint swatches and count washers into little bins. Ryan was 4 years older than me and had always been the bright one in my mother's eyes. He was handsome, loud, quick with a joke, and the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people think he knew more than he did. He sold houses for a while, then started flipping them with borrowed money and big promises. Mom called him ambitious. When he bought an expensive truck on credit, she called him driven. When he missed family dinners because he was closing deals, she bragged about him like he was running half the city. Melissa was younger than me by 2 years. She worked as a dental hygienist, kept her life neat, and hated conflict so much that she could sit in a room full of unfairness and act like silence was the same thing as peace. She wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. I became the family failure in slow motion. It didn't happen because of one big disaster. It happened because life got complicated in ways that did not look impressive from the outside. I left community college when our grandmother got sick, because someone had to drive her to appointments and sit with her during chemo. Ryan said he couldn't miss work. Melissa said hospitals made her anxious. Mom said I had the most flexible schedule, like that made it no sacrifice at all. Then, when Grandma passed, I tried selling handmade baked goods online from my tiny kitchen. I was good at baking and bad at marketing. After 6 months, I stopped. That little failed side business became family legend. From then on, every stable, ordinary choice I made was treated like proof I had no direction. A steady job at the clinic was playing small. Renting instead of buying was not planning ahead. Being single at 33 was another sign you settle for less. If Ryan changed careers twice in a year, he was bold. If I stayed in one place and paid my bills, I lacked ambition. I told myself their words did not matter. But words repeated long enough start living in your skin. The warning signs with Dad started the year before he died. He became tired in a way that sleep did not fix. He rubbed his chest sometimes when he thought no one noticed. He also got quieter around Ryan. At first, I thought it was normal stress. The store had been slower since the big chain home center expanded outside town. Ryan had started helping with the business side. He handled vendor calls, talked Dad into using digital invoicing, and kept saying he could modernize the place. Dad never liked computer systems much, so it made sense to let Ryan take over some of it. But little things felt wrong. Dad stopped keeping the old yellow ledger on the front counter. He began locking the office door upstairs. Once, when I came by with soup, I heard Ryan arguing with him in a voice so sharp it cut through the wall. By the time I stepped in, both of them were smiling too hard. Another time, Dad asked me if I still had copies of my old bookkeeping notes from community college. He said it casually, but his eyes stayed on me like the question meant more than he wanted to say. I brought him the notes the next week. Ryan looked irritated when he saw them on the office desk. The favoritism got uglier after Dad had a minor stroke that spring. He survived, thank God, but he tired easily and had trouble with balance for a while. I used my paid time off to drive him to therapy. I filled his pill boxes. I sat with him during long afternoons when the house was so quiet you could hear the refrigerator hum. Ryan visited too, but always in a hurry, always with a call to take or a meeting to run to. Mom still praised him for doing his best. When I corrected one of Dad's medications because she had mixed up the bottles, she snapped that I did not need to act like I knew everything. Then Ryan asked Dad to sign a power of attorney just in case. Mom backed him up. Melissa said it sounded practical. Dad hesitated, but he finally signed limited papers tied to the store and short-term medical matters while he recovered. After that, Ryan changed. He stopped asking. He started deciding. He told suppliers to speak only to him. He moved files from the office. He told me not to bother Dad with store questions because it would raise his blood pressure. A month later, I showed up with dinner and found the locks on Bennett's supply had been changed. Ryan said it was for security. He said it while looking straight at me, like he wanted me to understand I was no longer welcome in a place I had loved since I was 6 years old. The main betrayal came in pieces, and that made it harder to fight. Ryan began telling people Dad was disappointed in me. He said Dad worried I would ask for part of the store, even though I had never helped build it. That one almost made me laugh from disbelief. I had stocked shelves there as a kid, painted the back room at 17, covered phones in flu season, and spent half my weekends there during the years Ryan was too busy building his own future. But Ryan spoke with such confidence that people believed him. Mom took his side because it was easier. She began repeating his lines in softer words. Claire means well, but business is not her thing. Claire gets emotional. Claire is not good under pressure. Melissa never repeated those things, but she never defended me either. The one time I asked if she really believed I would take advantage of Dad, she stared at her coffee and said she did not want to get in the middle. That was the day I learned how lonely a family can make you feel. Money got tight that summer. Dad's therapy bills piled up. The store, Ryan said, was barely breaking even. Mom started hinting that everyone needed to sacrifice. I offered to help with Dad's copays. Ryan smirked and asked from what savings. 2 weeks later, he told the family some petty cash was missing from the store office, and that my name had come up because I used to have a key. I thought Dad would shut that down right away. Instead, he looked sick and exhausted, and Mom ushered me out before I could finish defending myself. I cried in my car so hard I had to pull over before driving home. I kept hearing the same sentence in my head. They really think this of me. Dad died in early October from complications after a second stroke. There are losses that arrive like storms, and there are losses that arrive like the floor simply gives way beneath you. His felt like both. At the funeral home, Ryan shook hands and accepted sympathy like a man already stepping into his father's shoes. Mom clung to him. Melissa cried quietly. I stood beside a spray of white lilies and felt outside of my own life. 3 days later, Mom called me to the kitchen table. Ryan was there with a folder. Melissa sat near the window, twisting a napkin in her lap. Ryan said the store had more debt than I knew, and Dad had made clear choices before he passed. He pushed a paper toward me and said if I signed a disclaimer and accepted $5,000, it would keep things simple. He said Dad had left the business matters to people who could handle them. Mom said it gently, but she said it. I read the page once and set it down. Something about it felt rushed, incomplete, almost hungry. When I asked to see the will, Ryan said probate would take time, and there was no reason to drag this out. I stood up, told them I would sign nothing, and Ryan laughed under his breath, like that was exactly what a difficult failure would do. The next morning, I got a call at work from Lakeside Community Bank, asking me to come in regarding a sealed instruction file connected to my father. That was how I ended up in Mr. Harlan's office in my funeral dress, facing the silence that finally cracked my family's story open. Mr. Harlan was a careful man in his 60s who had known Dad for years. He opened a folder, verified my ID, then turned to my mother and siblings and said the appointment concerned a transfer that had already been completed according to the property deed and loan satisfaction terms. Ryan interrupted 3 times before Mr. Harlan finished one sentence. Finally, the man looked at him over his glasses and said, very calmly, that Dad had been precise. Then he explained. 2 years earlier, Dad had bought the empty brick storefront next to Bennett Supply, along with the small apartment above it. He had renovated it quietly, using a modest banknote and his own savings. The property was now fully paid off through an insurance settlement and a reserve account Dad had maintained. Title had transferred to me upon his death. The keys in Mr. Harlan's hand were for 214 Maple Street. He also handed me an envelope in Dad's handwriting. On the front, it said, "For Claire. Open upstairs." Ryan went pale first, then red. Mom kept saying there had to be a mistake. Melissa stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. I wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I felt cold. Because if Dad had gone to this much trouble in secret, then he must have known something was badly wrong. The apartment above 214 Maple was plain but solid. Fresh paint, clean windows, a narrow kitchen with open shelves. Downstairs, the storefront smelled like new wood and dust. There was a long counter near the front, industrial sinks in back, and wall shelves Dad had built himself. On one side sat a used but well-kept commercial oven. My knees actually gave out when I saw it. Years before, Dad had joked that if I ever opened a pie shop, he would build every shelf with his own hands. I had laughed because it sounded impossible. Standing there, I touched the counter and cried until I had no breath left. Then I went upstairs and opened Dad's envelope. Inside was a letter, a small key taped to the paper, and one business card for an attorney named Marisol Vega. Dad's handwriting wobbled in places, but his message was clear. He said he was sorry for what he had allowed. He said he had seen more than I knew. He said Ryan had used the store's money for outside deals, lied about debts, and tried to make Dad sign papers Dad did not trust. He wrote that he had started keeping copies of everything in a locked file cabinet in the office at 214, because he no longer felt safe storing records at home or at the hardware store. He said if anything happened to him before he could fix it, I should take the records to Ms. Vega and let the truth do its work. Then, in one line that broke me all over again, he wrote, "You were never the failure, Claire. You were the one who stayed." The cabinet key opened a gray metal drawer packed with folders. Bank statements, copies of checks, supplier invoices, loan documents, printouts of transfers from Bennett Supply to an LLC with Ryan's name on it. There were also sticky notes in Dad's careful block letters. Not store expense. Ask Ryan. No invoice attached. Paid from business line. Why? My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the floor. I called Marisol from the business card. She met me the next morning at Maple Street. She was sharp, warm, and had the tired eyes of someone who had seen plenty of families blow themselves apart over money. She spent 3 hours going through the cabinet with me and never once acted like I was slow for needing to stop and breathe. By the time we finished, her mouth had become a hard line. What Dad had suspected was real. Over at least 18 months, Ryan had moved money from Bennett Supply into a side company he controlled. Some payments were disguised as consulting fees. Some appeared tied to property repairs at houses Ryan had been flipping. There were vendor balances Ryan had told Dad were unavoidable, but the records suggested the cash had simply been drained away. There was even a note from Dad after a meeting with an outside accountant saying more documents were still missing. I asked the question I had been dreading. Did he steal from Dad? Marisol answered the way honest people do when the truth is ugly. She said it looked like financial misconduct, breach of duty, and possible fraud, but she wanted the full set of records before using words that could explode a family in court. I remember nodding like I understood, even though my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The unexpected helper I never saw coming was my clinic coworker, Nina. I had been hiding most of this from everyone because I was ashamed, even though I had done nothing wrong. When she saw me trying not to cry in the supply closet, she quietly closed the door and said I did not have to carry this alone. Nina had a brother who worked in forensic accounting for a regional firm. She asked his advice on what records mattered most. He gave us a checklist: merchant accounts, credit line histories, vendor aging reports, deposit slips, tax filings. Suddenly, I had a map through the mess. Over the next 2 weeks, Marisol requested records through probate authority and by formal notice connected to Dad's estate. Ryan fought every step. He called me dramatic. He told Melissa I was trying to destroy what was left of the family. Mom left 2 voicemails saying Dad would never want public embarrassment. I listened to both and deleted neither. The old version of me would have folded just to make the room less tense. This version had slept on the apartment floor above a secret my father died trying to protect. I was done making myself smaller so other people could stay comfortable. The evidence built slowly, and that made it stronger. A supplier confirmed Ryan had ordered materials billed to Bennett Supply and sent to one of his flip properties. A contractor produced emails showing Ryan promised payment from the store's operating account. The outside accountant Dad had met with came forward and said Dad was deeply worried but felt pressured at home. Then the hardest truth landed. Mom had known more than she admitted. She may not have understood every transfer, but she had signed a home equity line the year before to help Ryan bridge cash flow on a project. She never told Dad the full amount. When Dad found out, their marriage was shaken in a way none of us children fully saw. The huge reveal came during a probate mediation Marisol forced before things went fully to court. We sat in a beige conference room with stale coffee, legal pads, and a box of tissues that looked like it had seen too many families. Ryan arrived in a sharp suit, still carrying that same confidence that had fooled people for years. Mom looked 10 years older. Melissa would not meet my eyes. Marisol laid out the timeline piece by piece. She showed the transfers, the invoices, the LLC filings, the property repair trail, and Dad's handwritten notes. Then she produced one final thing. A recorded statement Dad had made with the outside accountant and notarized 6 weeks before his death. In it, Dad said he believed Ryan was using business funds without permission, and that he feared Claire was being blamed to keep her away from the books. Hearing my father say my name in that tired but steady voice almost broke me. Hearing him say, "She is the only one I trust to do the right thing," broke everyone else. Ryan stopped talking after that. Not because he felt sorry at first, but because the room had turned into something facts could not be argued out of. Mom began crying in a thin, frightened way I had never heard from her. Melissa covered her mouth and stared at the table. Ryan finally admitted he had meant to pay it all back after 2 house flips sold. The market had turned. He got buried. Then he kept moving money to cover old mistakes. He said he never thought Dad would dig so deep. He said he blamed me because it was easier than facing what he had done. There it was. Not movie villain evil. Not some master plan. Just weakness, pride, panic, and the terrible damage those things can do when nobody stops them. The settlement took another month. Ryan gave up any claim to 214 Maple. He signed repayment terms tied to the sale of 2 properties and a structured lien on future commissions. The hardware store was sold, not because I wanted it gone, but because the debt and damage were too heavy to untangle without ruining what little remained of Dad's estate. That hurt more than I expected. I grieved Dad, and then I grieved the store. Mom came to see me one rainy afternoon while I was painting the downstairs walls of 214. She stood in the doorway, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She said she had believed Ryan because believing me would have meant admitting she had been unfair to me for years. She said she kept telling herself I was fragile, and somehow that became an excuse for never asking whether I was actually the strongest one in the room. It was not a perfect apology. Real ones rarely are. But it was honest. Melissa apologized too. She said her silence had been cowardice dressed up as peace. I told her that was exactly what it had been. We both cried. It did not fix everything. It just opened a door. People ask if I wanted revenge after all that. I didn't. Not because I am saintly. I'm not. There were nights I wanted Ryan to feel every ounce of the shame he dumped on me. But revenge would have kept me tied to him. I wanted my life back more than I wanted his ruin. So I took the truth, the property, the settlement terms, and the distance I needed. I stopped attending forced holiday dinners. I blocked Ryan for 6 months. I let lawyers handle what lawyers needed to handle. Peace, I learned, is not pretending nothing happened. Peace is deciding what no longer gets access to you. The next year, I turned 214 Maple into Bennett Pie and Coffee. Nothing huge, just a warm little shop with 6 tables, a pie case, strong coffee, and Dad's shelves lining the walls. I lived upstairs to save money. Nina helped me post opening photos online. Mr. Harlan came on the first day and bought 2 slices of apple pie, one for himself and one for the ghost of a stubborn hardware man. Half the neighborhood showed up that week because they had loved Dad, and because small towns remember more than families do. Runner the shop was hard. I woke before dawn, burned my first batch of crust one Monday, cried over payroll taxes twice, and learned how heavy 50-pound flour sacks feel when your lower back is already done with you. But every hard thing belonged to me. That made all the difference. Within a year, local offices were ordering pies for meetings. By year 2, I hired 2 part-time workers and offered soup at lunch in winter. The same people who once looked at me with pity now called me hard-working, steady, smart with details. I smiled, but deep down I knew the truth. I had always been those things. The world had just finally caught up. Ryan and I are not close now. I hear bits and pieces through Melissa. He downsized. He works more quietly. He goes to therapy, which I respect. Mom visits the shop sometimes and waters the plants when I am away. Our relationship is careful, slower, and more honest than before. It may never be easy, but at least it is real. If there is one thing I learned from all of this, it is that being underestimated can feel like drowning when it comes from your own family. But other people's labels are not mirrors. They are often just shortcuts, excuses, or shields for truths they do not want to face. I was never the failure they called me. I was simply the one they found easiest to overlook. And maybe that is why the truth survived. Because while everyone was busy measuring success by noise, money, and appearances, my father was watching something quieter. Who stayed, who noticed, who told the truth even when it cost them. In the end, those brass keys were not just for a building. They were for a life I finally had the courage to unlock for myself. So if you have ever been the one they dismissed, the one they blamed, the one they thought would never become much, please hear me when I say this. Truth may take time. Respect may come late. Family may fail you. But your worth does not shrink just because others were too blind, too proud, or too comfortable to see it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop begging to be believed. Build your life anyway, and let the truth arrive with its own keys.